Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of YPO Presents. My name is Dinal Limbachia. I'm very excited to be moderating this conversation. I lead strategic partnerships for UN Women's HeForShe initiative, which is a global movement that invites men and boys as allies for gender equality. Today, I am very excited to welcome two global leaders in the world of sports, Stacey Allaster and Ameet Bains. Stacey is the Chief Executive of the United States Tennis Association and the Tournament Director for the Professional Tennis and US Open. And Ameet is the Chief Executive Officer of the Western Bulldogs Football Club, which is a member of the Australian Football League. Welcome, Stacey and Ameet. Very glad to have you both here. Excuse me. Joking already.
Thank you, Dinal. It's great to be here and it's lovely to meet you and Ameet for this important business and societal topic.
Yes, likewise. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and be with you guys today.
Thank you so much. So before we get started, just for everybody that is watching live right now, feel free to post your questions in the comment section below. If you're not already following on social as well, please do so that you can get a notification as soon as the next episode of YPO Presents is available and scheduled. So let's get started into this conversation. As we all know, with the pandemic showing signs of declining, many sports venues and tournaments are effectively back to capacity and on schedule. What has, for both of you, what has the past year taught you in terms of looking at the athletes, the fans, sports executives, when it comes to the importance of sports, and what lessons can we glean, especially when it comes to gender equality as a result of those things? Stacey, I'd like to come to you first.
Thank you, Dinal. So when we think about this past sort of, I don't know how many months now, but March 11th was my last day of working of 2020 until we had the 2020 US Open. I talked to the athletes to get their insight into this question. And I want to share with everyone a few of the common themes. And one was to enjoy the process every day. I think our athletes, I'm not sure, Ameet, for yours, it's a 45-week schedule. And they get ready for a slam 2 to 3 weeks, and then they go. On this one, they didn't know when game day was going to be. They're all over the world. And so it was to get ready all of the time, which was very different than how they've approached their pre-competition prep. I was pretty pleased to hear enhanced gratitude. Sometimes with professional athletes, we hear them when they have some concerns, and we welcome their concerns. We don't really hear that many of the gratitude, but I want to read something that one of our top players and Olympians shared. Our world of sport is so small in the grand scheme of the world as a whole, and what happens in it. Keep things in perspective and know how lucky we are. I think for myself, as a sport executive, our athletes, we all are very, very lucky to work in sport. And I think our athletes have learned that through the pandemic. From an executive perspective, when you go from the majority of your revenue from game day to zero overnight, it accelerated this importance of the digital fan, the virtual fan, and the engagement of the fan on those digital platforms. And I think for gender equality, from the USTA's perspective, there were no fundamental key learnings because we just have this approach and policy that whatever we do for the guys, we're going to do for the women. When we provided subsidies for the players when they weren't working, it was equal. We have seen other sports necessarily didn't take that through cost cutting and maybe didn't provide those same services to women, and great on those women to step up and say, this isn't right. So that's from our side, what this pandemic has sort of taught us.
Great, thank you, Stacey. Ameet, what's your experience been?
Yeah, very, very similar to what Stacey's described. I think in addition to the gratitude, it's also been the flexibility and agility of not only our athletes but our staff. As Stacey referenced, there's so much uncertainty, and for us in Australia, it was the same. And being prepared to move at a moment's notice in terms of relocating teams, and as you've seen with some of the North American sports as well, having hubs in locations that were largely COVID-free. So I think from that point of view, it's really changed the mindset and the dynamic of our athletes and our staff. We're so used to the rigid aspects of high performance and everything having to be absolutely in place as planned. So now that's flipped dramatically. I think from a gender equality point of view, what it's done, not only for the athletes, but certainly a lot of the staff, is really embed flexible working arrangements into the norm now, where we all realise that we can perform our jobs effectively from remote locations. A little bit different for the athletes, obviously, that need the right equipment and infrastructure, but I think for everyone else, it makes a significant difference. And those things have continued on. And for me personally, spending more time taking the kids to school, or even leaving work early to pick the kids up from school, things like that now with primary school age kids, is something that's become part of my routine as well, and is important for all of our people.
Fantastic, thank you. You talk a lot, both of you mentioned, obviously lots of things have changed, and we talked a little earlier before we started around the focus on gender equality at the moment. With YPO and UN Women's HeForShe initiative, we recently did a survey of chief executives, and one of the findings from that was that 57% of global chief executives say their organizations are more diverse than they were 5 years ago. Is this true for the Western Bulldogs and USTA? And do you think you've seen similar trends when it comes to the makeup of your fans and supporters? Ameet, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, it's undoubtedly the case, Dinal. I think the greatest impetus for us as an industry in a sport, so we're a native Australian sport. Our sport is played around the world, but at very much rudimentary amateur level, so the only really professional leagues in Australia. But in the last 5 years, the biggest change was having a professional women's league start up, and that's really been the impetus for a lot of that change and growth. Whilst you see that 33% of our fan base overall is women, when it comes specifically to our female professional team, that number's almost 50%, and that growth's been really profound. As a club, we've sought to make some significant change over time as well. So our chairperson of our board is female. Of our 9 executive directors, 5 are female. Of our executive team, 3 of 7 are female. So we haven't necessarily sought to make those appointments with any token equality. We've been fortunate to be able to appoint some really accomplished women into those roles. And when you have that at a more senior level, that obviously then filters down into everything else that you do.
Yep, definitely. Stacey, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been with USTA for 5 years, so I can speak from the beginning of that journey. And my prior portfolio was the chairman and CEO of the WTA Tour, founded by Billie Jean King. And we staged the US Open at the Billie Jean King USTA National Tennis Center, the only stadium in the world to be named after a female athlete. So I already knew that it was critically important to me that I was going to join a company where diversity and gender equality was a core value. I'd share a story, though, personal. So when I joined 5 years ago, there was an 11-person senior management group. And when prior to my joining, there was 1 woman out of the 11. Wow. And so I made 2. And then maybe 6 months later, we had 3. And Katrina Adams is our chair and CEO at the time. She's just recently read a book, or wrote a book, and she shared this story. And I kind of thought it was just between her and I, but I was in a board meeting and someone came in and they said, "Oh, look at this. We've had a, X% increase in women on our senior management team." And I, maybe in a little cheeky kind of way, said, yeah, it was a low bar, and Katrina looked at me and winked at me, and she's not put this in the book. So look, I'm very proud of the organization, but that's where we were 5 years ago. So where are we today? We have a board that's essentially equal. It's a 15-person board. It's 8 men, 7 women. I'll take the box, and one day we'll be the other way. Our national staff is 48% women. That's fantastic. The senior management team is only now 9, and 4 are women. So that's good. We've had some great progress in that middle zone. Now that we talked about the frozen zone, we have 7 out of 15, and 3 of them have recently been promoted in the last 6 months. So for us, we haven't, sort of publicly made targets, but there's real intention inside the organization, our board, and our nominating committee, because the reality of it is we're an equal sport. And we're not just talking about prize money. We're talking about fans are about equal. Our players' participation are about equal. So the USTA is really, really committed to having, the administration and how we present the sport to represent America and to have a gender equality and diversity.
Fantastic, thank you. And hopefully, with the influence and the power that you have, hopefully it inspires your peers as well to do something similar. And
we hope
like
so,
you say, have the intention to take
it really
the action.
Is, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we're talking about the U.S. program. Dave Haggerty is the president of the International Tennis Federation, and the scorecard there does not look like the USDA's, but he's created a program called Advantage All. And he has, in fact, set targets and has made an investment. We should maybe talk to him about being a partner of the UN Women's HeForShe.
Yes.
Now, because Dave and Katrina Adams is chairing it. They're doing all of those aspects that we need business leaders to do within governing bodies of sport.
Great. That's great to see. So moving on to one of the high-profile issues that often comes up in sport, which is around equal pay for male and female athletes. Could you talk a little bit about how you determine pay scales? Is it by performance? Is it driven by revenue? And what does the ideal of equal pay, what does that mean for an organization's bottom line? Ameet, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, look, it's obviously the most significant issue in many ways. And, as a sport, given our Professional Women's Association only commenced 5 years ago, we do sadly lag behind some of the national sports. Tennis Australia, as Stacey knows, does an amazing job, led by Craig Tiley, in very much the same way that Stacey described. The challenge from our sport, if I step back for a moment, is that the Australian Football League, the head office, not dissimilarly to the NFL, sets the salary cap limitation on what players can be paid, as well as a cap on what gets spent on the high performance programs. And with that embryonic stage of our female competition and the season only being half the length, it does create quite a divide. I think one of the challenges you describe as well is that historically we have based a lot of the merit on pay with respect to things like broadcast revenue, sponsorship revenue, when, as we've found in the last 5 years, the real growth of the sport from a female perspective, in our case, has really been around participation, fans and things like that. So where our governing body's done a terrific job is to continue to invest in that. And for us, it's also measuring it in different ways with a real growth spurt in female sport across the country, not just in our code, but across all sports. There's been a significant amount of federal government funding and different state government funding into infrastructure. Okay. So I think we're also seeing the benefits of different ways in which our entire sport can benefit, not just from a female participation perspective, when we invest in women's sport.
Fantastic, thank you. And Stacey, from a USTA perspective, what can you share on that topic?
So we'll talk for a few minutes just around the U.S. Open, and I'll share some experiences of the WTA. That there's still work for us to do with inside the USTA. So as Ameet had noted, the U.S. Open has paid equal prize money since 1973. And Tennis Australia went to permanent equal prize money in 2001. And we finally got it at Wimbledon in 2007. And Roland Garros. So it's not that long ago. But it came down to Billie Jean King and the original 9 challenging the establishment and a sponsor to say, I'll pay the difference. And that was how we started. Today, the business model, we sell the Open as one ticket, one broadcast package, sponsorship. There's no picking and choosing. And there's never a discussion. My Tennis Canada days, absolutely. We had to actually, if you wanted a seat in the men's event, you had to buy for the women's. But those days are long gone, thankfully. At the WTA, the principle of equal pay comes down to equal product. If there's equal product on the court, the WTA demands equal pay. So underneath the slams, there's that next tranche of events. There's 9 of them, and 4 of them are mandatory, meaning the same players that are going to play the men's event play the women's event. The other 5 are 7 out of 10, and USTA has one of those in Cincinnati. And there, the prize money is 50% less. That's very difficult for me as a woman to accept that. It's not because we're not trying to address the matter. The business model is very different because the commitment model is different. 3 top 10 players can make a significant difference in your player field and driving the gate. The media rights, sadly, are 5 to 6 times more for the men's. They're sold separately than the women's. And when I joined, I put it as one of my goals. Gordon Smith, when he hired me, said, we've got to get Cincinnati to equal. Well, that's good talk, Stacey. How come we're not there yet? And look, the truth is there's been quite a dynamic process around prize money in tennis. And before I can go to our board and say, hey, we're going to go to equal in Cincinnati, I need some stability around what prize money is going to be for our men's event, what's the starting point. And then you go, USTA is going to pay X, a sponsor is going to contribute X, and WTA will participate. So we're going to get there. It's much slower than I would like. Pandemic didn't help. But that's still an area for us in tennis that we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, as do many organizations.
Yes, many. Yeah.
Yes. So in terms of marketing and revenue, are your organizations moving away from business models based on broadcast rights and viewership to ones based on fan engagement and storytelling? Ameet, maybe I can come to you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. There is a lag on that. I think from our perspective, roughly 60% of our industry revenue still comes from the broadcast deals that we have in place. So we are still reliant on that. But I think what last year really expedited, as Stacey referenced as well, with the lockdown and no crowds and seasons continuing, was the real need to connect to fans digitally. And that was something that, was born out of necessity, but has really fast-tracked the way in which we do that. And now I suppose it's continuing to build upon that. I think what the fans really enjoyed from our experience last year was getting to know a lot of the athletes on a personal level and seeing how they coped away from on-field performance and getting that real insight into their life and particularly during a period where we're all going through such difficulty as well. I think for us and in the female space as well, with our competition having been a more recent introduction, the female athletes are far more grateful to have the opportunity to really talk to the media or talk about themselves or their journey. So that's led to some really fantastic offerings as well. And for us, our chairperson, Kylie Watson-Wheeler, is the MD of Disney Australia New Zealand. So she brings a wonderful lens in terms of how we can really draw out the stories for female athletes in particular. And probably the last thing from an Australian perspective, we've been really fortunate to have currently some amazing female athletes that are at the top of their game on a global level. Ash Barty, obviously, from being the best. Even Sam Kerr in football or soccer, depending on where you're watching this broadcast from, is playing for Chelsea and is in the top 5 players in the world. And, their individual followership through social media is astronomical, far more than any of our professional sporting teams or national teams.
Amazing. Thank you. And Stacey, do you feel there's been a shift from your perspective?
So, Dinal, parallel exactly what Ameet has described. We're all, all sports are in this transition of the linear to the digital, and that intersection will happen at different inflection points for different properties. I think one of these opportunities for women's sport, what it lacks is consistent media exposure to engage with fans. And, it's the out of sight, out of mind. Here we're going to come to the Olympic Games. And what happens during the Olympic Games? We see these amazing female athletes. We hear their stories. We're inspired by them, but then they go back to their countries, to their other sports, and they go dark. We don't see them again. And there's too much competition amongst other entertainment properties that are garnering consumers' attention. So with the advent of technology and more cost-effective solutions for streaming, the Gen Zs and millennials being okay with not watching full competition and wanting highlights and actually wanting more of the off-court and the storytelling, and the female athletes being more willing to share, I really am feeling that this is going to be a game-changer opportunity for the athletes themselves and for sponsors. There's a question in the chat. Can sponsors play a bigger role in absolutely, but they also have to step up. They talk a good game. Women's sport is probably getting about 7% of exposure today as compared to men. 7%. Sponsorship, it's maybe 1 to 2%. So we all talk that we love women's sport. We value them, but when it comes time to writing the checks, and this is that trifecta of values, ethics, and profits. And if we build it, just like in 1973, there was a sponsor who said, I'll pay the $70,000 difference between the men's US Open prize money and the women's. And Virginia Slim started the WTA tour because it wasn't right that the men were making $12,000 at a tournament and the women were making $2,000. It's this combination that is required. But technology is going to really help, and the changing media consumption patterns of this next generation of fan.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is it's time to show up for women's sports. It's time to be present just as we are for the men. So we talked a little bit about the diversity and how that's shifting and the transition for the athletes. We've also been seeing more women when it comes to referees, umpires, judges, etc. in sports. Is that a trend that you're seeing in tennis and in football? And what's the reception been to those individuals coming into these roles? Ameet, maybe I can come to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Dinal. That has been a trend, probably from our end, particularly in the officiating realm. It's probably a slow burn at the moment. Certainly in other parts of our programs. I think the ongoing challenge for us in terms of our sport, as I've mentioned a few times, we do have the professional women's competition, but it's still getting a critical mass of women into the professional men's competition in key roles. So whether that's officiating, which is, as I said, a slow burn, but also in some of the key high performance roles as well. One of the great things that our professional body did last year in terms of, I suppose, the heartache that all professional leagues face, and certainly teams, in having to cost cut following the onset of COVID, and as Stacey described, a shift to zero revenues overnight, was to include subsidies and grants for the retention of female staff within your high performance program. So, for us, that was fantastic. We'll probably not someone who is going to shed some of those key female roles anyway, but to have the subsidies for, our head of sports science or our senior physio or medical staff or others in the strength and conditioning program has made a significant difference. And I think it's that investment that continues to be important, as again, Stacey referenced. It's not only your partners, in our case, it's the governing body, but it's everyone that's connected to the game as well, continuing to invest in it and really backing up the rhetoric with hard financial investment. Yes,
precisely. Yes. And Stacey, what's your experience been?
It's a good description, Ameet. Slow burn. And in the area of officiating, I think, why is it important to have female officials? It just presents the product, and having men and women playing on the same stage for us, men and women officiating matches, ball persons is another piece of it. When I joined, it'd be the women's final, and Billy'd be texting me saying, why is there one female out there for the women's final? So it comes down to the intention. Officiating, being very technical, starts at the ITF. And again, as part of the Dave Haggerty program for Advantage All, officiating is a pillar of growth. Right now, we are not doing well. 21% of all officials in tennis worldwide are female. We laser it into the United States. We're doing better. We have about 2,500 officials, and 35% are women. When we get to the big stage, the US Open, I'm really proud of my team. For the last 5 years, it has been a very intentional exercise to increase the number of women who have chair umpire opportunities, because the issue is, well, they've never done men's matches. They don't know how to do the big matches. Well, if they don't ever get the opportunity, then we're going to be in this same vicious cycle. Mm-hmm. So my leadership is a mixed doubles team. My referee is male, my assistant referee female. Same with the chief umpire, and we currently have a talent development pipeline for more women for those leadership roles. Chair umpires, we have 35 that come from around the world. It's still only 13. It's making improvements. But what's most important, we have about 650 matches without the juniors. About 35 to 40% of those matches are chaired by women. That's important. So they're getting that experience with the men's matches. The guys just get used to it. It really is not an issue. It might have been in the earlier days. And as we get to the semifinals and to the finals, we actually have a committee, and we have someone from our diversity and inclusion team. And we sit, and we don't just let the officials, say, well, we want this person or we want this person. We're trying to remove that bias and have equality for the semis and the finals. And the US Open has led the way with women chairing men's finals. And I'm very proud of that. And Australia's got one, so that's good. And I'm hoping Wimbledon might see, maybe we'll see a nice surprise at this Wimbledon, but I know that they're working on things as well.
Yes. Excellent.
I think the other area, just to touch on very briefly, is also in the commentary team.
Yes.
I think another critical area where we've started to make some progress in terms of having female voices and female experts commentating on the male game, and I think that's if you talk about from our perspective, a lot of our revenue is still coming from broadcast, and that's still being the single biggest way that we connect with our fans, particularly in these times where crowd capacity is still limited. Having those voices there and credibly engaging in the game is a critical one that we need to continue to nourish as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So moving on to the next question. In recent years, we're all well aware of the Me Too movement, and really what it has brought to light is the abuse and harassment that many women face in society and all parts, whether that's in the workplace or at home. How can sports leaders protect athletes, but also create an environment that's safe for training and for competition, not only for women, but for all genders? A really important topic that we're all facing at the moment. Stacey, maybe I can come to you first with that.
Okay. Well, it is a very, very important topic. Let me talk about the WTA first, and then around the USTA. So when the athletes come on the WTA, they're 14, they're 15, they're kids. And tennis had a history of some really challenging issues with young women about 25 years ago. So led by Kathleen Stroya, she created what's called the Age Eligibility Rule and the WTA Athlete Assistance Program. It's unique, and I think they have been providing leadership in this area. It has a few pillars to it. One, it's investing in trained staff. So the WTA actually hires specialists to be trained for the signs of physical, emotional, sexual, financial, and now cyber abuse, and the impact it has on these young teenage women who, the one doctor explained it to me, is like teenage girls. It's like a boxcar. Everything's not in alignment yet. Yet we've taken these young girls and put them on an adult stage in an adult world with a spotlight in an individual sport. There's no hiding. So the staff, we're all trained. The staff were trained. The players, the coaches, the agents, the parents, on looking for the signs and zero tolerance policies. I have had in my career banned a coach and a parent for life, and it's just critical. You have to have those zero tolerance policies, and the age eligibility rule allows them to progress with limited play in the professional world. And sometimes the agents would say, "Oh, you're ruining women's tennis. You've taken away the phenom opportunities of a 16-year-old winning Wimbledon." And I would respond with, I'll take expanding the life cycle of a female athlete who is healthy mentally, physically, and emotionally, for 15 years rather than a 2 or 3 year moment. And the WTA's athlete eligibility rule is really a gold standard and has proven successful. And at the USTA, we have just a zero tolerance policy for it. And when there are issues, we take action, and extensive training, cultural training, and unconscious bias, and so forth.
Great. Thank you for sharing those initiatives. It's great to hear that those, checks and balances are in place from a very early age.
It's not perfect, and sometimes we think, well, the athletes are living in this bubble, and we can't protect them from society. And but what we can do is educate them, and the people around them, critically important, the people around them, to understand what's going on with these very, very young children, young adults who are playing in an adult world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ameet, what can you share from a football perspective?
Yeah, I think as Stacey described, this is a really profound human and societal issue. I think in Australia, as a country, that the spotlight, following the Me Too movement has really been in big corporate, certainly in the political landscape as well, where women have found their voice. I think one of the greatest challenges at the moment is dealing with some of the historical allegations that have been made and trying to actually, give the victims the comfort and support and the voice that they deserve in those situations when, there's obviously been a significant time lag. I think what it is doing now, though, is setting up the right dynamic and environment to confront and handle any issues that arise in the here and now. I think as Stacey referenced again, it's a lot of education and training, but it's also just elevating these issues and having conversations about them and actually normalising the way in which we need to call them out and really have accountability and transparency. So it's setting up the more rigorous confidential processes that allow for complaints to be raised in a safe way, and then for that process to take place where the person that's making the complaint does feel protected, but it's also then having the right transparency and accountability at the other end to make it clear that there's zero tolerance on issues like this as well. So not just for our athletes, obviously, that in terms of how the question was asked, but certainly for all of our people as well, if we are going to continue to want women to succeed in the higher echelons of sport, not just as athletes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you raise an important point around reporting, and many times victims may feel that they don't feel like reporting. And I think when we look at figures, we actually want to see and it might look negative, but we want to see numbers going up so that reporting is happening, so that it can be addressed. And oftentimes that gets overlooked. But I think you mentioned a really important point there.
One of the other dimensions that it's been my experience, and Ameet, if you've had the same, is with tennis being so international, the cultural upbringing of some of our athletes is very different in other countries as compared to here in North America. And at times, they're accepting of some of these, the abuse that they may be experiencing, and or they don't feel confident in any way, shape, or form to go against people that they trust and or could be family members. So to Ameet's point about the safety, but it's tough with young ones and with cultural differences that we have. That's why I think, with the WTA team, they're looking for the signs. They're looking for the signs of, an athlete just struggling. And we actually, it's kind of like the doctors in the house. We set aside the athlete assistance room and a place that can just go talk. And a lot of that happens informally, right? It's not in a formal process. And that's why trained staff on the ground and the WTA staff trained to be looking for those signs of distress amongst the athletes is a key part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we just have a couple more questions to go. And just a reminder to everybody who's listening, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the comment box and we'll come to those shortly. So looking ahead at the future of gender equality in sports, what challenges do you think remain? And let's say 5, 6, 7 years, what do you think needs to change and will change in those coming years? Stacey, if I could come to you first.
Okay. Well, I think one particular area that is real and live right now in sport are pregnancy policies for professional athletes. And oddly enough, there are 2 Canadian Olympians who right now potentially will not be able to go to the Tokyo Games because of the implications around either with the IOC rules, qualification rules that were changed, and of course then the importance of fewer people going to Tokyo as possible. But to leave a baby behind where the mother is trying to breastfeed, it just makes no sense. And like these are some, this is some fundamentals because our athletes, we want them to have children. We want them to stay in the game, just like we do in the corporate world. And this is happening more and more, certainly in our sport. We had 11 mothers at the 2020 US Open. So it's quite something. So that's kind of like poignant and real. And it's on the world stage, it's just critically important that we have the acceptance of female athletes and that they can have babies and they can go to the games. Like we talked about the 1%, the 7%. We're such a long way away from compensation for women. And I think Amy has put in the chat, or I'm sorry, one question: can companies do more? It's like the chicken and the egg, right? Organizations need the oxygen is cash. You need money.
Yeah.
So, sponsors, values are there. And the bottom line is the female economy drives the economy. The women control the share of the wallet. Yet, 98%, 99% of sponsorships are in men's sports. There's a disconnect here. Mm-hmm. So the sponsors really need to invest in a meaningful way. And what really needs to happen is we have an old antiquated business model for sponsorship. It's really a return on investment. It's a number of eyeballs. And right now, because women's sport doesn't have the platform, because the media broadcasters can't get the advertisers because the audience is not there.
Right.
It's just this around and around kind of circle. So we really need to move to more of a qualitative model. And again, I do think the social media platforms are taking us there already. Mm-hmm. And more sort of around this brand affiliation. These women are incredible ambassadors for companies. And the transformation of athletes getting sponsorship, male or female, to these influencers on social media, which is crazy. People are getting $500,000 for one tweet. Yeah. There's the opportunity for our female athletes and the business model to ultimately change. And I said it earlier, it's the combination of profit. Professional sport is a business, no question. But it also comes down to values and living true to your corporate values and the ethics. It's a business and a societal matter. And that's what's so great about the UN Women's HeForShe program. Those champions of the program have made an intention. They've been transparent, measurable goals, and they're holding themselves accountable to get there. We can't get there tonight, or maybe in 5 years, but it's about the journey to make the improvement.
Yes, absolutely. And Ameet, over to you. What were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, Stacey's provided a really comprehensive and thorough answer there. I think I'd reiterate some of those points. We're as a country, as an industry in terms of sports here, we're justifiably proud of some of the ground we've made over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, but we're also cognizant on the size of the challenge that still sits in front of us in terms of getting that genuine equality. And it really does come back to the normalisation of a lot of the things that we've spoken about, and really, giving life to that age-old cliche of you can't be what you can't see. So whether it's the athletes, whether it's any of the key stakeholders involved in the sport, either in the actual facilitation or playing of it or the spectating of it, we really need to continue to push for that as well. One of the things that we have in Australia is an organisation called the Champions for Change, which was set up by a number of corporate male CEOs a number of years ago under the auspices of a lady called Kate Jenkins, who's been very impressive, a lawyer, but also in the gender equality space as well. And that organisation now has a lot of sub-branches, including a sports one with a lot of the key sports CEOs around the country as well. And that really is designed to push for the advancement of women in sport and within our industry. So it's the acceleration of women's sport and a lot of the issues that Stacey spoke to around the actual performance side. But it's also the off-field component of that, and how do we ensure that women are leaders and part of all of the influential decision-making to then be able to give effect to a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about today. But I think it's really pushing for a greater normalisation of a lot of the things that we've started to embed over the last 10 to 15 years.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So this brings me to my last question for both of you. Incredible insights so far. So thank you very much for everything that you shared with us. You're both industry leaders in the world of sports. You're both members of YPO. How has that benefited you being part of this global community of 30,000 other chief executives, over 140 countries? How has that benefited you? And can you talk a little bit about your leadership journey as well as part of that? Stacey, if I could come to you first.
Sure. I joined YPO here in Tampa Bay, Florida in 2009. And that was the time that I just become the chairman and CEO of the WTA Tour. And one of the gifts of YPO is that they put you with other industry leaders from other enterprises to be your confidential network, your forum. And so I got really fortunate to be in a group of great guys, all guys at the time, all from diverse other businesses. And that was the gift to me. I'm still with that forum today. We still meet once a month, half a day, and we're all over the world. But it's this bond that brings you together. And it's that safe place as a leader where it's lonely at the top. People not necessarily, share with you everything you need to hear. They check in for your blind spots. For me, it's like I now have 6 brothers that I never had. And I can call them at any time if I need anything, personally, professionally, family. I found YPO to be fantastic for my husband. There's not many John Milkoviches to have, he was the CEO of Milkovich Inc., the family, and he was a stay-at-home dad. And 20 years ago, he was the only dad at the schools. So that was great that he would come together. Quite often we'd go to YPO events and they'd say to John, well, how long have you been a member? And he said, well, it's not me that's a member, it's my wife. So hopefully we're making progress there within the YPO community for that. But and now I'm part of the Sports and Entertainment Network is how I got connected to this. And I hadn't done a lot in YPO beyond the family events and the Tampa Bay regional events. But now I've had that breadth of the international and in my industry, and it's just been terrific. Another great group of guys, predominantly a few women. And I just feel incredibly lucky to be part of this community, the education. And I tell everyone from my team, it's now what I learned at YPO. It's about your personal, it's about your family, it's about your business. And that's how YPO brings it all together for us with like-minded, really cool, talented, and caring people.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ameet, if you could share a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, it's been equally wonderful for me. I'm a more recent joiner starting in August 2019. So my experience has been a really interesting one. And I think particularly for last year with COVID shutting down a lot of what we could do in what would have been my first full year, actually highlighted to me the real power and strength of YPO, particularly from a global perspective and in terms of the sports and entertainment industry network, as Stacey referenced, just being able to talk to a lot of leaders around the world in different sports and entertainment organisations about the challenges that they were facing. We all had our unique challenges, granted, and that the size and scale of those were different depending on where you were situated in the world. But there's a lot of commonality in that. And I think for me as a leader going through something as dramatic as last year where there were quite honestly times where you didn't know what was going to happen in the coming weeks. And, it was a genuine existential threat, to the business at different times. Having the comfort of being able to speak to people, as Stacey said, confidentially, but, really openly about those challenges and really share and learn from each other was fantastic. And then I think for me on a personal level, I think, the opportunity to grow away from what you do for a living has been really terrific as well, to share that insight, to talk about your own family situation. I'm a father of an almost 11-year-old daughter and an almost 9-year-old son, and I think some of our forum discussions have been most profound when we've been sharing stories about our children and some of the difficulties that we might be facing. And ultimately some of those can be a lot more emotionally taxing and draining than some of your work challenges. So I think the fact that through YPO you have an opportunity to really cover off on you as a whole person and really learn and grow in that macro context has been invaluable for me in my almost 2 years.
Ameet, you will remember this in about maybe 7 years. So in my forum, the majority of us had young kids. Some were a little bit older than mine, and we had one forum member older. So we've gone through this complete cycle, right? From little kids to high school to graduation to some marriages. It's quite remarkable. And we do spend the majority of our time on our families, because as CEOs, they are so intricate to how we're going to perform at work, right? And that's why YPO is just like, those three are part of the offering education-wise. The young program we have for the youth, and the family events were the rock star events for us. It paid for my membership, a hand over fit. My kids thought I was, the greatest through the YPO family events.
Amazing, thank you. So just checking on the questions that we have, I think we touched upon these a little bit, but in case there's anything else you might want to add. One of the questions is, can sponsors and broadcast companies take a larger role in advocating for equal pay? Stacey, you spoke to that a little bit, but Ameet, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think it does come back to, or the answer is yes, absolutely. And I think it comes back to really investing in those areas as well. As Stacey said, cash is king. So getting that investment and really making it worthwhile is what's going to be the major difference going forward. And for an industry like ours, as I said, that still relies heavily on broadcast revenue, that's where it needs to come from.
Great, thank you. Stacey, anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I did have an experience where an employee group mobilized and basically said, why are we spending all this money on men's sports and not in women's sports? So we were able to secure that partner, which was fantastic. It still was, 20 cents on the dollar, but we were grateful for the partnership. So employee groups, and again, consumers, I think consumers should be demanding more of companies, particularly women, who are buying the products and making the decision for household on so many, large ticket items. And companies will ultimately listen. I think we're at this inflection point. We were installed for a bit, but I'm optimistic.
Great, thank you. And then final question, what suggestions do you have for leagues like the WNBA, USA Women's Soccer to help their players achieve pay parity? Ameet, any thoughts on that from you?
Yeah, I think it comes back to one of the earlier questions about disconnecting the value in purely broadcast and sponsorship dollars as well. As I touched on in my answer to that question, there are far more powerful ways in which women's sport is having a profound impact across the country, and certainly in our industry, whether it's participation, grassroots support, things like that over time will lead to a significant financial return, or in other ways such as government funding. So I think that we really need to reframe the approach and the basis on which we're making those calculations in order to have that, and just have the leap of faith to say that, well, it may not be economically justifiable right now if you take a really technical view or calculation of it, but if you invest now, the dividends will come over time, and it really is a long game that we're playing.
Great, thank you. Stacey, any additional thoughts to add?
Yeah, I'll just go back to our sport, and the power of the athlete is immense. And we wouldn't have equal prize money today in the Grand Slams had it not been for the athletes. The original 9 were these 9 women who took on the establishment and sacrificed everything, their endorsement deals, and they put themselves on the line. And in '73, Billie continued to advocate for equal prize money at the US Open, and she got it. It took the sponsor to ultimately make up that difference. It wasn't, the USTA deciding to do it. It was, a sponsor investing that they're going to. So for us as the administrators, it's mobilizing the athletes. And when we ultimately got equal prize money at Wimbledon and Roland Garros in 2007, it goes to Venus Williams. It was Venus who Larry Scott got to go into the All England Club boardroom to hear from her. And public sentiment. We got the public rallied. We got government officials rallied that it wasn't right, that they weren't getting equal prize money at Wimbledon. And ultimately, it's not good for their brand. And so, athletes being strong, like we have seen in women's soccer here in the United States, and in women's hockey. There's a new collective bargaining agreement with the WNBA that I believe players are pretty happy with. And Kathy Engelbert, the new CEO, came in and she had that qualitative conversation with the athletes and they put that together. So athletes, investors, and the public, the consumers, can help us get to gender equality.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, that brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in and has been watching. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have moderating this conversation. 2 real powerhouses in the world of sports. So really, really grateful for this conversation. Just like to invite both of you to make any closing remarks, if you'd like, before we close. Ameet, anything you'd like to add?
Firstly, I'd just like to thank you all for the opportunity to be part of this panel, and particularly with someone like Stacey, who's got an amazing background and has done so much for a global sport like tennis. I think ultimately we all just need to keep being advocates for change, and it's through that advocacy and particularly for a network like YPO and the reach that it has through all levels of society to really push and to reinforce that change as well, and to take some personal accountability, I believe, in terms of driving that as well. But ultimately, thank you for the opportunity to speak and share the stage.
Thank you. Stacey, any final remarks?
Dinal, I'm going to share in Ameet's appreciation to YPO and to you. But first, before I go back to the UN Women's HeForShe program, Ameet, thank you. Because ultimately, as we talked at the beginning, it really takes men in leadership positions to be the advocates and with intention of the action with goals. So thank you, because it's just not going to happen without more of you and you. So it's been my pleasure and privilege to be on this panel for you as your mixed doubles partner. And to YPO, important to have this conversation. It translates into YPO as well, as we're on the diversity and gender equality journey. And Dinal, your work is so critically important in our society and in our business.
Thank you.
And I did take the time to go on the site, and I encourage others who have not. There's some phenomenal content there. And it really brings to light what this conversation is about and how we're going to improve our economies and how we're going to improve the lives of young girls and little boys around the world, that we are all in this together as equal human beings. So thank you very much for all of your dedication to this important societal matter and business matter.
Thank you. Incredible final words. So we will end it there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And please follow on social media so you'll get notifications of the next sessions. And we hope you'll be able to join us then. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Bye.